Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. It has been a while since I've spoken to a camera, so excuse me if I'm a bit jumpy, if I'm moving all over the place. That also could just be ADHD, which is actually what we're going to talk about today. In my other videos on ADHD, I see a lot of people commenting that they got diagnosed really late in life. And I was diagnosed, I think, when I was 23, so I definitely wasn't a child, but it was later than a lot of people, but also not as late as some of you. So I kind of wanted to share my experience and talk to you guys about why I think some people, girls in particular, or feminine presenting people, get diagnosed later in life, and why I think my ADHD got missed when I was a kid. As I'm going through this, I am going to be popping up little snippets from papers that I've read on this topic because I think it's super interesting, and I've linked the papers down below so that you can go and have a proper look as well, because they're super worthwhile. And honestly, it's incredibly validating hearing other people's, other women in particular, their experiences on how ADHD affects them day to day, because it does present differently in people who are socialized as girls compared to people who are socialized as boys. But anyways, the papers are down below. I could talk about them forever. We're going to talk about them a bit today. Here's why I got diagnosed later in life. Number one is I'm a girl, or I present as a woman to the outside society. And women with ADHD present differently to men with ADHD. The diagnosis criteria that we use to diagnose ADHD was created and developed by using young men. So what we know about ADHD is completely based on that. When I think of the typical person with ADHD, even as somebody who has it, I think of a young boy in class who speaks out or is super disruptive and extroverted, maybe the class clown. That's who I imagine. And that is in complete contrast to who I was at school. That could be for a lot of reasons. It could be just because it's who I am. But young girls are socialized to sit down and do the work and to not cause distractions. We're not allowed to speak out in that same way that young boys were afforded the opportunity to do that. I was quiet. I was a teacher's pet in a lot of classes. A lot of my ADHD symptoms are internal. My hyperactivity, while I still fidget and stim a lot of that hyperactivity is racing thoughts. And that's where that comes from for me. So to the outward world, I'm not necessarily presenting as somebody who has typical ADHD or is what we think of when we think of the disorder. Some of the symptoms that are common in young girls are things like talkativeness, but we often associate those things as being just because they're teenage girls, or just because you're a girl, yeah, girls are talkative. We don't actually look at that as a symptom of ADHD or as a symptom of a mind that is racing like crazy. I was very talkative as a kid. I could yap your ear off. I could still do that now, as you're seeing. But I wasn't disruptive. I didn't interrupt other people as much, and I wasn't bouncing in my chair all the time, moving back and forth. In hindsight, when I look back, I think I was able to do these things, but in different ways. So for example, I used to go to the bathroom like 4 or 5 times in a 2-hour lesson because I think I knew that my body needed to move and I needed to change something in order to continue to stay focused and to be present. But again, that didn't disrupt other people. That only focused on my own learning. And so my ADHD was missed. The second reason why I think I got diagnosed late is because I am intelligent. And it feels weird to say that. It feels like a brag, but it's honestly not. I was a straight A student. In university, I got 90% or higher. Like, I did very, very well. And because I did well in the traditional neurotypical schooling system, I know I could get away with more things. So when I handed in projects late, or when I emailed the teacher saying, I'm not gonna get this to you on time, can I have a few more days, or can I have an extension? I was allowed to have that, and that's because I did well. I didn't struggle with the content, and I didn't have to spend as much time on it as I know some of my peers did. I didn't have to pull all-nighters at school because I was able to hyperfixate and I was able to get things done, or I was able to communicate with the teachers and ask for a later due date. Whereas I know some of my peers have done that and they weren't allowed that opportunity, and it's because they didn't do well. So I think teachers assumed that they were the lazy ones, or they were the ones that were struggling, and they were the ones who needed to be kept to a tighter schedule. But in reality, even though I did well, I was seriously struggling. Now that I'm on ADHD medication and I know how much easier it can be to initiate tasks or to actually get things done, I recognize completely that my schooling experience should not have been as hard as it was. I should not have been having that many panic attacks trying to write a 500-word essay. things should not have been that hard for me. But again, that was seen as general school stress and not stress that something was not right or something was neurodivergent within me. I don't want to associate neurodivergent and being wrong, but this is just for me and the lack of being able to find better words right now. And so because I was intelligent, things got missed. And on that note, I think things got missed because I do really well in a structured environment. I did well at school, I did well at university, I did well in my master's degree. And that's because I had really clear deadlines, I had an exact plan of what I had to do and when, and I honestly thrive in that space. So a lot of my symptoms, I think, were able to be masked or hidden because I was given so much guidance and I had so much support around me. I had a mom, amazing, who did everything. I had family and friends who took care of me, drove me to things. I never had to do things for myself, really. And it wasn't until a couple of years ago where I moved away from home and my inability to get day-to-day tasks done was really highlighted to me. When I had no structure, it became clear that me sitting on the couch for 8 hours a day is what would happen. And it's not because I was lazy, it's not because I didn't want to do things. I had no plan, I had no deadlines, I didn't have anything to help me, or I didn't have any accommodations. That's how I feel. If I don't clean my flat, I don't have a mom yelling at me to clean my flat or to clean up, tidy up. Not that she would yell about that, but I have just me and Callum. And even then, Callum does so much of the cleaning. Like if I was by myself, I can completely see how I would fall into like this pit of uncleanliness, let's say. But I still have somebody else that I have to I don't want to say impress because I feel like we're 12 years in. No, I'm still trying to impress him. And so I think being in a structured environment for so long meant that a lot of these things weren't apparent. And that's another reason why I think I got diagnosed later. Like I've mentioned throughout this, and you're probably picking up on a little bit, is that I have anxiety. And I do think that that is another reason why I was diagnosed later. I say that because I had such intense anxiety around handing things in on time or around being late to things. The anxiety would fuel me to do these things. Now, I'm not saying that that is a healthy way of being. I'm just saying that in a lot of cases, I do think my anxiety is the reason why I was able to do a lot of things. Now on ADHD medication, I recognize that there's another way of doing things. I don't have to motivate myself with shame or guilt or being anxious. And I think people may have been able to attribute a lot of my ADHD symptoms with anxiety. Now, I definitely do still struggle with anxiety. I'm not saying that I don't, but in comparison to how it was before I had the language of ADHD and before I realized that so many of the things I was struggling with were okay, and actually for ADHD, that explains a lot. Before I had that language, I thought it was just me failing. And so my anxiety definitely is less surrounding a lot of these things. It's still there though, as I'm sure you can hear. Another reason why I think I was diagnosed so late, and I definitely alluded to this in the beginning, but it's because our diagnostic criteria is sexist. And a lot of the ADHD symptoms, like being late or being disorganized or interrupting people in conversations, being impulsive, a lot of these symptoms are associated with masculinity. And when I say that, I mean that if I have an unclean room, I'm a feminine presenting person. If I have an unclean room, people associate or would say that I'm just bad at being a woman. They wouldn't say, oh, there's an underlying neurodevelopmental disorder going on there. They would say, oh, that person's bad. They're just a bad woman. And a lot of similar experiences like this are reflected in the papers that I mentioned earlier too. Like for mums with ADHD, when they're late to pick up or drop off, people just assume that they're a bad mom. People don't think that they're actually struggling underneath and that day-to-day tasks are harder for them. We attribute so many symptoms of ADHD with being a bad woman. And how upsetting is that? And I think because of this, we have so many more women who are self-referring. That's what I did. We can make fun of it all we want. We can say, oh, it was TikTok, blah, blah, blah. TikTok is making everybody have ADHD. But it wasn't until I saw other people, and I do have friends with ADHD, but it wasn't until I heard other people's stories more prolifically available online to me that I was able to be like, oh, that is something that I struggle with. And I think to go back to my earlier point of the fact that we associate ADHD symptoms with being a bad woman, it means that female presenting or feminine presenting people or women have to be really good at masking their behaviors or masking their ADHD behaviors in order to be seen as socially acceptable. So for example, in conversations with people, I spend about 90% of my brain power looking at people in the eye, thinking about, am I nodding? Have I looked away recently? Am I making too much eye contact? Can I actually focus on what they're saying? Oh, they blinked recently. Have I blinked? Have I moved my shoulders enough to breathe? Like, I kind of feel like that scene of Bella learning to be a human as a vampire in Twilight. Like, it just, so much energy is trying to focus on what people are saying and how my body language matches up, and is it appropriate, and do I look like I'm being rude? Have I interrupted them recently? Have I apologized for interrupting them? And then I miss what the people are saying. But outwardly, you're not knowing any of that is going on. And so you wouldn't know how much I'm struggling in social settings. And that's really hard to communicate with a doctor as well when you don't have the language and or recognize that maybe that's not what everybody else's brain is doing in conversation. Maybe other people's brains are able to focus on what's happening. So yeah, a lot of women do have to self-refer. I was one of them. And that's also why I think I got diagnosed later in life. I do think some changes probably need to be made in how we diagnose ADHD. I think we need to recognize that the prevalence amongst men and women, boys and girls, is actually pretty similar when we take into account the socio-cultural context of which, like, our disorder develops. Like, we're not having ADHD in isolation. We're still all socialized in this same world that has different expectations upon men and women, upon boys and girls, unfortunately. So naturally, the disorder may present differently. But I think it's about recognizing those things. It's about not invalidating people when they present differently. And I also think a large part of the ADHD diagnosis, or like the diagnostic criteria, is about how it affects other people. Are you handing things in late? Are you disruptive in conversations? All of those things kind of have like an external locus of focus. That's not a phrase. We're not gonna. Whereas I think it's really important to consider how ADHD affects you. I actually had one of the doctors at the NHS tell me that my ADHD wasn't that severe because I've never been in trouble with the police and I still have a job. Yes, those two things are true, but when I'm sitting on the couch for 8 hours a day, literally unable to move because I cannot get my brain to move me from point A to B, like, that feels too monumental of a task. That's severe. That is affecting my everyday life. That's affecting my relationships. That's affecting my ability to achieve what I want to achieve. How is that not severe? And so yeah, people can mask. I can mask really well, I think. I say that I can mask well, but as soon as I told two of my best friends that I was diagnosed with ADHD, they were like, yeah, we know. And so I was like, why didn't you tell me? But there are a few reasons why I think I was diagnosed later in life with ADHD. And all in all, I am happy that I pursued the diagnosis. I'm happy that I was able to advocate for myself in that setting because I know that is really challenging. And I know a lot of people struggle with that. But it gave me the language to explain a lot of the behaviors in my life. It made me feel validated because I realized I wasn't lazy, I'm not crazy. Things are just slightly different for me, and that's okay. And it also gave me access to treatments, and it's helping me slowly learn how to better accommodate for myself and my brain and how to ask for the accommodations that I need. And without that diagnosis, I wouldn't have had access to all of those things. So I think of you all in the comments telling me that you're being diagnosed at 60 and 70 and finally you're grieving and understanding why life has been the way it has for you. I'm so sorry that you've had to go through a neurotypical world, being made to feel like you're not enough and made to feel like your way of being isn't valid and not getting the support that you need as the big thing, as the big factor. I'm really sorry. And it's okay to take as much time as you need to grieve that process and be gentle with yourself as you learn to change the way that you approach and speak about yourself to yourself. So those are the reasons why I got diagnosed late. Are there any that you think I missed? I would love to know what you think down below, and I will hopefully be speaking to you all very soon. Have an amazing year ahead, guys. Happy January. Be kind to yourselves. Bye.